Get started.
Hey guys, we're gonna start.
I'm going to talk about Zettelkasten and Zotero. So Zettelkasten, you may have heard, it's been a bit of a buzzword for the past couple of years. People using things like Notion and Obsidian and learning Markdown in order to take notes more effectively and to link them together. So that's an important concept that's going to come back around. Zotero, of course, is a reference or citation management system. Perhaps some of you use Mendeley, proprietary software, gross. Zotero is open source, so that's kind of why I chose it as my reference and citation manager, as my choice, my personal choice. But I think why I got accepted to be a presenter at this conference. So, oh, by the way, I'm Kieran Layton. I'm a reference librarian at Case Western. So, Zettelkasten is a German word meaning slip box or card catalog. So us librarians in the room, we're kind of familiar with this concept, linking things, categorizing them under subject and tagging them. But the power in a Zettelkasten is that you're taking notes. So you're thinking about it and putting that thought process down in a box somewhere to access months and possibly years later.
Sorry for saying this, but talk louder so that the mics can pick you up for the remote folks.
Yeah. This figure here is a demonstration of a physical Zettelkasten. Each little manila card represents an idea. So the top row is ideas 1 through ... 23. And the second row represents ideas that exist in between idea 1 and idea 2. So 1-1, 1/2. Those ideas exist in between idea 1 and 2 of the first row, and so on. Each of these are tagged, and those are noted in blue, and you can see that in the bottom right legend. So they're linked together using those tag systems, but also categorized using typically subjects. That's Nicholas Luhmann. He is the guy who popularized Zettelkasten. I think he coined the term. He was a sociologist for the last 20 years of his career, which was highly prolific. He wrote dozens of books and hundreds of articles. He was prolific. And his Zettelkasten at the end of his life had something like 60,000 items in it. So combined between two Zettelkasten. And he said that the power in the Zettelkasten is that they can be recommended as partners of communication. You can communicate with your collection. And I think David is going to talk a bit about how we might do that in a digital era. But it's impossible to think without writing. You have to put down your thought process. I tell my SJD students, why would you use this in your thesis? That's what you should be writing down for your literature review and for, well, use later when you're actually writing. And it's impossible in any sophisticated or networked fashion. Now, I like that. You can kind of see where I'm going with that, possibly where David is going with that. So let's get into it. What is Zotero? Like I said, it's a reference or a citation management system. It's open source, free to use, and it'll always be free to use because it's open source. That's what it looks like. At least right now, this is Zotero 6. Zotero 7 was just announced a couple weeks ago, so it's in beta if anyone's interested in. Over on the left-hand side, you'll find your libraries, collections, and feeds. You can have shared libraries, meaning you can share them with the other reference librarians from Reference Services Quarterly, or you can possibly use the API for some other stuff. Down in the lower left is, in the blue, are your tags. Those are all of the tags in your entire collection. There's also a tags, I'm going to use this, over here in the metadata. That's item-specific information. So the items exist in the main pane in yellow, labeled as 3 on the slide here. You can have things like books, chapters, articles, webinars, podcasts. It supports a range of items, But once you get into actually generating the citations using Zotero, it might not be supported with your specific citation style language. So for us lawyers, we're typically using Blue Book or Allwood. Allwood doesn't exist in the Zotero library. There's a Blue Book Law Review one that exists, but it's not exactly fleshed out. You can add things manually. Don't know why you would do that. You have an ISBN from a physical book. You still do that. Or you can add them using the browser extensions. So Firefox, Chrome, Safari, they're all supported. The tricky thing with Firefox, though, is the browser extension is an XPI file, which is the same file format that Zotero uses for its plugins. So when you download a plugin for Zotero and you're using a Firefox browser, it will try to install on the browser. So you'll have to save as. So these are representative of the PDF, web page, or an EBSCO search or discovery layer search. If you do that, you can just kind of check off which items you want to download so you can download in bulk. It's very nice. Here are some other discovery tools, Research Rabbit and Lit Maps. You can connect them to your Zotero library to see who is citing whom, who are the major players. The bigger the bubble, the more citations. Those baseball statistics for academics. It's got a bit of cloud storage. It's got free storage, and then I think it's up to a couple like $20 a year. It's a freemium, okay. But you can also get a plugin, Zotfile, and connect it to the cloud. And you'll see on Zotero forums people warning you, oh no, don't save everything to the cloud. The cloud is not reliable. Don't trust the cloud. I've never had any problems with it. But if you wanted to save your metadata, your title, author, that information locally, and then just save your PDFs to the cloud, that's also something you can do. What's really nice about Zotfile is it automatically renames, organizes, and extracts annotations from your PDFs. So you don't have to go through and type all of those tags. It's grabbing them from EBSCO or from the PDF. It also has a plugin for Word, Google Docs, and WordPerfect. I don't know if anybody still uses that. You can add a citation using that little button. It'll go in right where your cursor happens to be. And you type in whatever you remember about the reference that you would like to make. Here I'm just typing in a bit of the title that I could remember. And here it produces a citation in book format. Unfortunately, the Blue Book Law Review citation style that exists in the Zotero library did not have bibliographic support. So if I click this button, it wouldn't come up with anything. It was a blank bibliography, which is something that they wanted to have in the SGD program. They're trying to do it kind of step by step, do a bit more hand-holding with the students when they're doing their literature review, all the way to when they're defending their thesis. So I changed it up. I made my own. Almost all of them are share alike or attribution, Creative Commons. So I added a bibliography. I put it in order, the order that the program director wanted. But you can see it's not perfect. Orderly should be Q. So you do have to do a once over and check things. It's a refrain I've heard quite a bit in this conference. I like Zotero 6 in particular because it added annotations and highlighting. So you can stay within the same application from the discovery, adding things via browser extension, to the outlining process. So it's got a lot more colors than a lot of places too, as well as little sticky notes, screen capture, screen snip. So you can do any of your annotating any way you like, and then just automatically put it into a note, which exists as an item in your Zotero library. You can connect it to another item, you can relate it, you can have it as a standalone. you can personalize your workflow to meet your needs. For those things that are unable to be annotated in Zotero, at least for now, I don't know if they're doing this for Zotero 7, but it just grabs a screen capture of the HTML, sort of like the Wayback Machine from the Internet Archive, if you've ever used that. So when you double click on it, it just opens that HTML that's stored locally on your computer and not the URL. You can change that in your preferences to open in the browser of your choice, where you can download these extensions, or install them, and annotate the web page. So if it changes, if the HTML changes, it might break your annotations. But for this purpose, it's pretty good. For the purpose of SJD thesis of 3 years, typically things don't change quite that fast. Another plugin that I would like to promote is the Better Notes plugin. It's got this networked view here, but it also has a traditional kind of table of contents outline view, as well as kind of like a timeline flow view. I'm not sure what it's called, but it does seem to be helpful. You can click on these links here. So this is another note. And once you do, it'll open in the side pane. And you can see that it has a link back to where it is in my main note here. So they're bi-directional. Happy Pride. They go both ways. Some other plugins here are PDF Preview, PDF Translate. Those are some of my students' favorites. The PDF Translate especially. It hooks up to the Google Translate API as well as several others, so you can choose from which one you want to do there. And you can see like how it's all coming together, or should I do a bit more connection? You can see that you're talking to your Zettelkasten now. You're using these things to annotate and put it together in an outline, which you can just export automatically to Word. Zotero Tag is probably my favorite. It automatically tags things as I download, so as I put in a PDF into Zotero, it will put a little marker saying that it's to be read. Once I click on a PDF, I've set my rules so that it will say that I'm currently reading a PDF. And you can set up a whole bunch of different rules depending on the different actions in Zotero to suit your needs. It's personalizable. That's my presentation. I hope that it made sense to you. If you have any questions, we're going to do that at the end. And up next is David Colarusso. Did I say that?
So I feel like, Kieran, you set everything up perfect for me. So I expected everyone would have been here for this talk. I want a quick show of hands. Who was at the keynote yesterday? Okay, and who saw Tim Stanley's bit just last time? Okay, I'm calibrating how quickly I'm going to go through certain slides, and this should be fun. This is going to be loads of fun. Okay, so this is entitled FindMySite.org, an LLM sandbox for legal educators. That was what we did. We put together a website to play around with these things. It's going to talk to Zotero. It's going to do all sorts of fun stuff. That was this was all 3 months ago when we put in the description. So like now there's a new website, ghostwriterqa.org. Both of those will get you to the same place. But really what this talk should be called is what we learned playing with LLMs. So the first thing we learned is people are looking through the wrong end of the telescope, which is to say they're using LLMs in I think a way that's not the right way. I'm worried about a lot of the same things, but I'm excited about entirely different things than most people I'm seeing. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about LLMs really quickly. Thanks to Pablo's talk, I'm going to zoom through that. We're going to talk about authorship. We're going to talk about accuracy. Then we're going to talk about how to write for trust in the age of LLMs. And then we're going to show a cool new tool that I think hopefully you'll want to use with your students called Generative Outlines. And we're going to do a little demo and some lesson ideas. So I got really ambitious last night. I went back to my hotel room And because I knew Pablo had covered some stuff so well, and a lot of stuff had been covered really well, I decided, let's just add. He made a lot of my slides redundant. So I'll just add more slides. So we're going to have a lot of fun here with the time. This is what I meant by this is going to be exciting. Because either this is going to be the best talk I've ever given, or it's going to crash and burn horribly. For you, it doesn't really matter. It's going to be entertaining either way. So what are large language models? Well, first, we've heard them described lots of different ways, right? So one of my favorite are automated BS artists, mansplaining as a service. But my favorite moniker really, I think, really sums it up. They are spicy autocomplete. Okay? So we know about this from Pablo. We also know about small language models because we all have them on our phones, right? I even have one in my email. It'll try to suggest things. So what's different between these small language models and these large language models? Well, 2 words. Big data. Yeah, thank you, John. So it turns out that if you train on, but these aren't just big they train on a lot of data. They also, you can put a lot of stuff in, and instead of just thinking back like one word, which is what your phone does, like based on this word, what's the next word, it can look back at a bunch of different words and also characteristics of those words. And so you get really interesting behaviors. So obviously, autocomplete Foursquare 7 years ago. Okay, I get the rest of the Gettysburg Address. And these are real prompts and responses. But because it's so large, it's also seen a lot of examples of things like diagramming sentences, et cetera, et cetera. So I can actually do a prompt like this, list the subject, verb, and object of the following sentence. And it'll give me a response. We can argue about the quality of the response, but it'll give me a response, and that's how it was structured. Most people have been introduced to LLMs through this type of response. So imagine if you saw text and you're auto-completing, how are you today? Well, what's the next thing you expect to be there? Well, a response. So these get made dialogues. This is where we have ChatGPT. But you can be a little more creative. You can say, write an original 1-sentence story. Okay, it's no for sale baby shoes never worn, but it's something. Text completion can be done in a lot of ways. Here's a text completion. I bet everyone here is now like, oh yeah, I know the answer to that one. Well, so does GPT. And then everyone's probably seen this graph. This is from the Katz paper on GDP4 passing the bar exam. So here's the average passing rate for the MBE. Here's the average student score, and here's GPT-4. So I think this graph tells us a lot. I think it probably tells us a lot about the MBE, but it tells us a lot. So this brings to mind the sage advice of Dr. Ian Malcolm. So we were so interested if we could, we didn't stop to think if we should. So what we often, when this comes up, 2 main questions I think come up. Questions of authorship and questions of accuracy. And I posit that those are really questions of trust. And so the question about if we're trying to think about how to teach our students to use these tools, how do we do that in a way that they can maximize trust? So here I need to pause and just, I include a slide in every slide deck I give that's sort of vaguely data science related. And it's a quote from the statistician George Box. And it says that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And I take that to mean you have to recognize that since models are wrong, they need to start, not end the discussion, and you always have to ask compared to what. What does it mean to have a model that's wrong but useful? Think of maps, right? You don't want to confuse the map for the territory. You have a certain amount of fidelity. It's going to help you get somewhere, but it doesn't tell you everything. So let's talk really quickly about what counts as authorship. So here I am. I'm working on an entirely original speech, and I'm in Word, and I notice all these like red squiggly lines and blue stuff. What are those red squiggly lines? Oh, spell check, typo. Okay, it's just going to help me say what I mean to say. No big deal. What are those blue? Oh, grammar check. Well, grammar check's just like spell check for phrases, right? So no big deal. I don't have to say that Word wrote this thing. I wrote it. It just helped me say what I wanted to say. Oh, I go back in time to like, 2013? The Hemingway app, right? This is like before, this is like the Grammarly sort of situation. It flags and says, oh, that's a little hard to read. That's this, that's that. Well, you know what? I can just change that. It's just like a style guide. When I write, I don't grant the style guide authorship and say this style guide was something that I authored it with me. Now maybe we get to a ship of Theseus problem. If I replace every single sentence based upon a suggestion from someone else, is it the same story? I don't know. What if I replaced every single sentence based upon some suggestions from ChatGPT? Well, it was still my idea as I wrote it down in the first place. It just replaced out all the sentences. It's the ship of Theseus, right? You replace, everyone knows the ship of Theseus? Okay, yeah, you replace all the boards. At what point is the ship still the ship? Okay. Well, what if I didn't know exactly what I wanted to say, but I knew the content? And I could say, oh, here, write me a speech. And so I could just have one sentence and then I get a whole speech out of it. Okay, these are all different ways that I could interact with things. So what I'm doing is I'm writing something. Some mechanical process or machine is generating something, and together they become some document. And the question is, when do we count something as authorship? I imagine at the very beginning of that, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, sure. But at some point you probably got a little queasy. And the question is, why did you get queasy? Can we quantify that, and can we help our students navigate that? Is it because once we get to the point of these word completions, that's just random words, or is it a weighted, is it because it's random? It's like rolling a dice to get our output. It's a weighted dice, but it's like rolling a dice. Is that the problem? Random plus what we put writing something, is that something we can't count as authorship? Well, I point to a whole bunch of novels that were written on D&D campaigns, where someone created a D&D campaign and then used that to do a story. In fact, D&D itself is creative storytelling in a group using random stuff to get your story. People might also know this book by Philip K. Dick, The Man in the High Castle. One of the characters in the book uses the I Ching, a traditional text for divination, to help write some of the stories in the book. Philip K. Dick used that actually to help do the plotting and some of the writing for the story. We didn't give the Hugo Award to the I Ching. It was given to Philip K. Dick. Now this brings up an interesting question, where is that information come from? Who's the author? And in some way, writing is a collaboration with everyone who's ever written before, in every book you've ever read for the author. But I think that the point is that if you have a machine doing something and you add something, that might look a lot like the randomness plus adding. So if we count that as authorship, why not the other? And then another important thing to realize is, there's the story of Michelangelo say, oh, how do you decide how to carve things? Well, I just get rid of the irrelevant parts. It's important sometimes as much what you remove from the process as what you add. The point is, authorship is complicated. It depends upon your audience. Whoever expected to see a byline for a press release? It's really about professional norms. So how many people think that every brief that a senior partner submit how many times does junior associates get a sign off on that? Right? They're not getting a byline because the signature doesn't mean author, I wrote every word. It means I'm standing by this text. So professional norms is important. The point is, authorship lies on a spectrum, and context matters. So here's where I'm going to posit something for us to think about. We think about the information of the input we gave and the information in the output we gave. And I think a very rough heuristic is that we think the information we put in was greater than the information that comes out, so like this spell check or whatnot, then we feel pretty good about it. We get a little touchy when it goes the other way. So it used to be that if you talked about, now about accuracy, if you talked about computers hallucinating, this used to be what you got. Right? So some deep image stuff from Google. I, of course, asked GPT about me. It gave a pretty nice bio, but it put me at MIT. Suffolk needs to do better branding because I didn't know about it. I asked it to give me some sites and for some law review articles. None of them existed. Of course, you don't want to become this guy, right? We all know about that. So, and there was another one this week. So it just keeps happening. The point thing we learned from Pablo was that they're not the malicious, it's just autocomplete. These tools are holding up a mirror. And the thing we really have to ask, it's a mirror of a snapshot of when things were trained. Do we like what we see in the mirror? So there are lots of issues of bias, the world as interpreted through the data set, not as we'd like it to be. So can we get a way so that there's input of a critical mass that will get an output, in this case, from a human and from the data, such that we get output we like? Why did it think I was at MIT? Well, it's not because it's because a lot of people with bios like me who end up on the web are somehow associated with MIT. And what I would say is, I say that's a situation where the relevant input, the ratio of the relevant input to the distracting input was low. So that's another bad thing. And more input is better. And now we start to see that if we take human input, in this case, plus the input we put into the model, we can think of different ways to make it better. So what I could do is I could put in my input, I could go to something, I could have the machine retrieve information. This is what we did at Find My Site. I type something, it will look at a Zotero library that I've put together. It will get that information, it will bring it back, it will put it into a prompt, and it said, the new prompt that it will feed that you don't see is it will take the trusted results I got from my Zotero site and it'll say, answer the following question, the one that I originally asked, but only if the information can be found above. If not, then say no. And so that's one way we might mitigate things like hallucinations. But all models are wrong. So what if the search is bad? Will anyone know? Well, so one of the things we do, since we're using Zotero, we can actually put the sites to our sources and put little links. And so you can check those. Now, there's an interesting question if anyone actually is reading footnotes. And so we have to worry about that failure state. In fact, I think that's one of the more dangerous things about this tool. When you use it, you don't know if it's making things up or if it's not. And that's a really big question. The other one is, maybe it could be too accurate. Maybe it's just copying exactly every bit of text, in which case, when do you know that you should be using quotation marks? So another way you could do it is you could ask someone something. The machine could ask you some more for that information as opposed to searching it. Then you could put that back in, and then you could get a new document. And this is what we've done with generative outlines. So basically, you can get all the information from the author. You could think of other ways you could do it. You could have someone do a search. You could then show the search to the person. They could approve it. They could give it out. That seems like a lot of work. But the takeaway is, if you put more user-supervised information in than you get out, you're probably in a good space. Otherwise, you're not really going to be an author or accurate. And we see that was also our authorship one. So the general rule that we get to is you want more user input than output. So wait a second. I thought I just could just type a sentence and get like a whole answer. No. You feel the need for speed? I'm sorry. You're going to have to slow down. But don't worry, you're going to get your AI co-pilot. It's just going to look a little different than you think. What does it mean that we're looking at the wrong side of the telescope? Everyone's looking at these tools and they're saying, let me give it a little bit of text and then it's going to produce this big thing. But that's not how LLMs work by themselves. You have to do something where you're giving it a critical mass of information that you trust in order to get something out. And so really good at things like summarization, entity extraction, but not the things that people normally think about. I think that a lot of people see this as you see it as a calculator for words, but it's really more of a slide rule. This is where I got ambitious. I added a bunch of slides. That's my mom's old slide rule. If you don't remember how slide rule works, you can add with rulers, right? So here's 2 rulers. I can add by taking the end of the slide rule, putting it over the number I want, then going up to the other number I'm adding, and then looking down, and I get my addition, right? You can also multiply. There's this whole log thing. You add logs, the same as multiplying them, blah, blah, blah. You can make a rule that you actually can multiply or divide with a ruler. The thing is that what the slide rule did is it helped us do, and here's Pablo's slide from yesterday, it helped us wrestle with the math. I used to teach high school physics, and we did lose something when we went from slide rules to calculators. We gained a lot in democratizing access to computation, but we lost the data disfluency, where you have to actually carry the number of places. If you notice on the slide rule, it only goes up to 10. So if you want to multiply 125 by 473, you're really putting it over 0.25 or whatever. So you have to hold stuff in your head and think about it. And so we have bad failure states. The key is to have a tool that makes you think about things. And this is where the great thing of the web comes in, because as I run out of time, I can say all models are wrong. So remember, output, you have to always look after it. You have to compare to what? So think about the blank page. That's what you're comparing it to sometimes. And we already do things where we give students structure to overcome the blank page. So let's move with that. And so now, this is where I get to say, you can go to findmysite.org, and you can actually look under the hood, and you can create these tools yourself. So here, you can find things that's tied to your Zotero library. You can actually, this is the great thing. I can just, as long as I've gotten you interested enough to go to the website, you can learn all that stuff there, and I don't have to tell you about it, but you can tie your library in. For that, you'll need a key, so you'll have to email me. But a lot of this you can do without a key. You can say, chatbots. Here I'm just looking at my sentences using the Zotero API key to look for my thing. But I can look for something that's not actually in my Zotero library. It'll semantically search, try to pull that up. I can also ask questions of my library. So as you saw before in the structured prompt, so if I ask a question of my library, I can have it suggest words to me about the library. And then this is the thing that I really hope everyone will do, is here is an outline written in a little format with a little bit of structure. All that structure is explained in this video, if you want to watch it. But the way it works is it will then have a conversation with the would-be author. And this is based on a journaling exercise I do with my clinical students. How comfortable was I working with other people? I'll say very. Did my fellow team members do their work? I'll say yes. Did you know what you were going to do and how you were going to get there? I'll say yes. I started early. That's always something I wish students would do, but it would be successful. What didn't work? Forgot to ask questions. Also another thing, how could I improve anything else? And I'll say no. And then now what happens, those questions were based upon pre-written stuff that I had. And now what it's doing, now it's responding to those questions. And so it recognized that I said I started early, and it's now going to ask me, well, what impact did your early start have on the team? And it's going to ask a bunch of questions based upon what I did that will then guide the author to writing something. It will then take that text, it will compile it together, and then it will use that to make a bunch of prompts that then create a first draft of that final document. That first draft will show up over here. You can take these documents, you can save them, you can open them as text files. And the great thing is that then you have a record, because this, as you might have noticed, changes as you interact with the stuff here. You'll have a record of your prompts. This is like guided prompt engineering for people who think about prompt engineering. But here's your exercise you can do with your students. One, you could make a template for a document that you wanted them to work on. And you could just have them run the template, answer it, and then, take the draft and edit it. But the thing I really hope people will do is say, students, make a draft, make a template for a document. Think about what your document is. Effectively what this does is say, I want a document, I have, it has 3 paragraphs or 3 sections. This section needs to have this section needs to have that. You can preload it with questions, or it can on the fly figure out the questions. The point is, you never learn something as well as when you teach it. So imagine if your students can teach it to a computer. And yes, we've entirely tricked them. It's a Trojan horse. They thought they were coming in, they were going to type a sentence, and then it was going to make everything for them, and we actually made them write more stuff and then get there. But I do think that actually it becomes very powerful, and I hope that folks will use this, and there we go. I think I'm within time because I think we just started there, and I think now we're going to have questions.
Yeah.
And the URL, findmysite.org, or Ghostwriter Q&A. Questions?
I have a question, if I may.
Okay.
I've been trying to think about ways to talk. I get a lot of questions from students about organization, especially in the context of simulation classes with a practical element of primary sources as opposed to maybe scholarship. Do you have advice for using Zotero and the Zettelkasten method for advocacy type writing projects and getting started with Zotero using those as opposed to coming in midstream? I feel like they often want, I need to impose order on the chaos that I've built up for 2 years, and it feels really hard, I feel like, to launch that library at that stage. So I would just love your thoughts on that.
So you can import from other citation management systems, but usually the problem is they don't have any management whatsoever if the organization is not there. I typically say, what are the sources that you're going to end up using? go through what you have and then select the ones that you're actually going to need to generate citations for, because that's what's going to take a lot of time and that's what you don't want to do, right? So then you feed that into either Zotero or the online version, ZBib or some other generator, which of course then you have to go and check because it's not always right. So in terms of organizing things, I usually just use like an Excel spreadsheet. That's what I ended up doing for all of my literature reviews, because I didn't use a citation manager when I was in school. I wish I had thought to look for something like this, but the main tip is to start early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would note that in addition to the web plugin for Zotero, they also have an iOS app. So I will find myself, on Mastodon or used to be Twitter, scrolling along, and then I can just save it from my phone, and that's nice. Also, shameless plug here with the proposition finder, which isn't using LLMs, just using semantic search. I was able to look at my library and then grab out things like I remembered someone said this thing, and so you can semantically find information. So I wouldn't recommend. I would always recommend you start early and put everything in before. But if you find yourself in a situation where you just have a bunch of stuff and maybe you don't know what it is you want to use, you can't find it, you could use a tool like this to plop everything in one library, then find the stuff that you need, and then go from there.
Yeah, a lot of time they've already begun writing and they've used a quotation, or maybe it's not a quotation, it's more of a paraphrasing, and they can't remember, is it a quotation? And so they have to go and search through their entire collection to figure out, am I plagiarizing? So that would be helpful for that too.
So David, I'm curious how, or if you're getting around the word limitation, and are you sort of pulling everything in? Because to me, what I would like to do is take the last book I wrote, pull it in, and then use GPT tools on it to answer questions. But there's that word limitation. So how are you working within that constraint?
So this is sort of what Pablo talked about yesterday, is you feed everything in through your library. So we've also done with short documents, so a PDF explaining how to get a name change in state X, Y, or Z. You can throw that in a library and then you can ask questions of that document. Even a document like that is usually over the existing limit. And so the first thing we do is we go and we actually we chunk the text. But we chunk the text with overlapping chunks. And then we basically make an embedding for each of those. So we have remember Pablo's idea of vectors? We have a bunch of numbers that semantically say something about the content. And then what that first query you did, when you ask a question, what it's doing is it's actually querying that database of chunked text, finding the texts that have the most relevant chunks or are most closely semantically matched with your query. And then it's using those to seed its sort of meta prompt. And it's saying, use this information here, as opposed to all the information in the text. So it's giving, in that way we construct a prompt that isn't the entire thing. And that's actually, that's the method that, I wouldn't be surprised, I suspect that's what they're doing at Case Text. Although, since they have GTP4, it's a much larger token window. But the idea, and this goes back to the question of authorship and trust, it works great if my search found relevant bits in the prompt. And you can also, in the Ghostwrite, you actually can have it show the prompts that it constructs for that. It works great. If you are only asking questions that are on point and it can find them, it seems like magic. The problem is when the search doesn't actually return relevant search, that's when you get into the hallucination area. And the problem is the failure state is really poor, which is to say that you don't necessarily know if it didn't find it. And that's why we moved with the Ghostwriter from looking at the Zotero library to having it where all the information comes from you, the would-be author. Because then you know that the information's there or isn't there. But yeah, that's how we chunk it up.
So is the chunking happening in ChatGPT, where I'm just taking, let's say, 800-word chunks and sort of saying, here's the first one, here's the second one, learn this, and then work with it? Is it happening in Zotero? Is it happening somewhere else?
So Zotero, you can think about Zotero as originally did all the OCR and the word bits, so it gets the word. So that's where we get the text. And then we have a database on the back end here. And what we do is we then, and that's why if you want to do that part, so anyone can use these tools for the libraries that are already loaded. If you want to load your own library, you got to talk to me and I'll give you a key. And that's just because my dean didn't give me infinite money to run this server. But oddly enough, if everyone uses this and uses up the money that I did get, then that probably looks good for me. So please go and play around. So I would give you a key, and then you could load in your libraries, and then it would be in our database, and then you could query it. You also can share another nice feature once you have a library. So as you can see, when this comes here, it's sort of loaded to your library. If someone comes to this site, by default, they see this BS about all this talk about how things work and automated BS. But you actually can you can share a group. So actually, if you want to like load your book or whatever, and then take it and then share your group, then you could share that out and then let people have a conversation with that library. Of course, that's the type of thing where then very quickly we'll probably, because I know enough people will follow your link that then I'm going to run through my budget real quick. But that's the sort of thing that you could do. I really hope people will want to write some of these templates. It's really just like outlining with a little bit of structure. And I think it's pedagogically really useful for your students if they started doing that outline. But you could also use it to create documents that you wanted. So I know John had been talking about creating scripts or something. You can imagine creating an outline for a script, for a negotiation or something. And then the subject matter expert could just sit down and answer the questions that it's doing that, and it could create that script. And then you could use that as to feed into your gameplay. Lots of possibilities.
Any other questions?
Yes, well, so as I've been working with this and think about this, so there's sort of two approaches. And lately I've been leaning toward putting the extra work on the prompt side. Okay, so, and I'm just using ChatGPT. I'm not leveraging something else into it. The other approach that I hear with Case Text and you is we're creating a specific database that we're drawing from. And there are benefits and detriments of doing that, obviously, of each approach. So it seems like you're now leaning toward the specialized data set as opposed to doing the extra work on the prompt side.
Well, or I'd say that we actually started with the specialized data set and we've moved to the prompt side, but now we formalized the prompt side through this idea of the generative outline. So it's like that guided prompt engineering. So it's actually helping a user without familiarity with that prompt engineering to actually create it. And if you actually you go in and you turn on, show the prompts. What you see is the prompts basically look at here's a document you're writing. You're going to help write this first section. Here's the definition of the section. Here's the stuff you know from before your interactions. Now write the first section. Or now, do you have enough information to write the first section from this? If not, create a set of questions. Ask the person those questions. Okay, after you've asked those questions, now create the section. Now move on to the next section. At the very end, then you do things like, okay, you have these 3 sections. They were written kind of in isolation. Rewrite them so they read nicely together. There's an automatic abstract feature. So if you wrote something, it'll just then say, well, make an abstract based upon these sections of X number of words. But it does all that in the background. So all you have to do is say, I want a document with this, a section that does this, this, and this. And then all that gets saved in that it's just a text file. Of course, this is going to be hard for me to. All that gets saved in that text file here. And so even your output eventually, so you can save that and come back to it. And what that does from an instructive point of view is you can see what your students' interactions were with the LLM. And so you can then look at that history trail effectively and say, okay, well, these are the questions they asked, this is where they got to, and then here's where they add their own stuff. And it allows you not to be the cop who's like, don't use the tool. It's like, let's use this tool, let's use it responsibly. And then also, let's make sure we have a mental model of how it works so that we know we don't become that attorney who thought it was going to give me cites that are right.
So you're giving them shareable, so potentially I have shareable prompts to kind of prime things, I have an outline that's an intermediate, I'm speaking really general here. It's a sort of an intermediate place, and that may also push them to create their own prompts and kind of repeat the process. And it's trackable, so I get around the whole thing of like, do I try to find some tool that's gonna say whether this is AI generated? Because I don't really care, because I can see what they did.
Yeah, it tries to open up some, the prompts are there, so, I mean, effectively, your description of what this section should do is a prompt. But what it does is it adds a bunch of structure on that to be able to stitch those together. So it's doing the, if you're familiar with prompt engineering, it's helping you do the think step by step, but formalizing that so that, as you saw when I was answering these questions, I'm just having a conversation. The other thing, which I didn't sort of notice, is there is then I haven't done it yet, but right now you can actually hit suggest an answer, and it will think about, based upon the stuff that you already answered, what is a possible answer. The next logical step would be to tie that into your library. So then, here it's guessing, and it's going to be more of a guess because I didn't give it much, but it's thinking that, it allowed me to do it ahead of schedule. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But this is where then a person would edit and say to you, sort of adopt that statement. That's sort of the danger zone. If you go to the website, there's a lot of, you'll always be shown the danger stuff first. And I think there's a lot of power there.
We have a question from the Q&A. How do we teach students to call the BS?
I think they have to know that they should be looking for it, right? So that's the first thing is to identify is that they should be looking for it. And people are like, well, why work with a BS artist? Well, we work with BS artists all the time. In fact, I've had some people say, oh, this sounds just like what attorneys do. I'm like, so that's really unfavorable. So knowing that it's there, and that's why I was, that's the heuristics here of like you want more information, quality information going in than you have coming out. And so the very first thing to understand is that if you're dealing with just a straight language model, that your prompt is really where that's coming from, or from the training data. And so you gotta ask yourself, just like our normal research tools, it's the same problem when Google and Wikipedia came on. How do you identify sources appropriately? How do you weight them? So like I don't know, I'm kind of crazy in this way, is that I look at these tools and everyone like it's going to be the end of scholarship, it's going to be the end of this, blah blah blah. You can't trust it. And I'm like, you know what? We just turn this around, and this reinforces all the stuff that we've been teaching forever. We just need to rework it into this time. And actually, if people just want to use the shiny toy and produce good work product, then we actually can use this to help us do that. And this is something that we can embrace. But we don't want to be those lawyers who keep thinking that it's a research tool, and that when it says something, there's a case, that there actually might be a case. You need to know that, okay, well, if I want it to be tied to trusted text, then I need to use something like case text or some company that when they go wildly wrong, I'm going to be able to sue them or something. I mean, I don't know. The point is, it's more of what we've always done. We just need to update it. And we say, well, the same way that you actually read the footnote. Make sure that it has a footnote and a trail that you can follow, and then they actually follow. I mean, that's really dangerous, though, too, because I think people start to trust things when it's right most of the time. And so you really need to develop that suspicion. But it's the same way that you might be, just fast forward and say, well, how do you get to be a senior partner and something comes across your desk and you know whether or not your associate did it right? It's those same skills. Now the question is, how can you learn those skills if you're not the one doing the grunt work? Well, I think you do tools like this generative outlines where you actually make mistakes.
Yeah, and I would say ask a librarian.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, I've gotten a couple questions from people asking for sources that don't exist. So don't send me on a goose chase. Please do try to check it yourself first. But yeah, go to the reference desk. I have a question. No one else has a question. So do you know of like a library of prompts catering to legal education or lawyers? So if you've done this and you can save it,
Yeah.
Can you share it?
Yeah, that's what give me a day.
Okay.
I mean, so right now, this is what I would love to do. Right now, there are some templates in here just to get people's ideas going. Like, let's do a short poem, right? And so that it's very easy to see what's going on. I could imagine adding more to that template, but I could also just imagine publishing some of these files for people to share, maybe on GitHub or somewhere. And then, yeah, then people could, because that's what I want to happen. So, yeah, give me some time.
Cool. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Findmysite.org. C-I-T-E. Site. And I really am incentivized to spend my budget, so please. And then reach out too, so that